Hi,
My name's J.C. McCauley.
I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Welcome to the Black Business Alliance show, where we feature the hidden gems of minority businesses throughout this entire state of Connecticut. My name is Guilaine Menefee, your producer and host. For today's show, we have a licensed marriage and family therapist, or LMFT for short, with psychotherapy services using effective methods and techniques to clients of all ages, both couples and individuals. She provides counseling sessions, life coaching, and even Christian-based therapy, a growing part of her practice. People come to her with a myriad of concerns, but for her practice, she considers herself a healer or restorer for couples in relationships, individuals seeking a deeper insight of their self, and Christians who may have lost their connection with God. She is able to provide these dynamic set of therapy because she is indeed in her own private practice. And this is why we themed the show today, Freedom in Private Practice. Let's understand more about this West Hartford-based LMFT and entrepreneur, Egypciel Victor-Lowderback. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me
Yes,
today.
thank you for coming. We're excited to have you. I'm just going to put a plug, Haitian American. So I'm also excited for many other reasons. But like we do with all entrepreneurs, help us understand your entrepreneurial journey. How did you get going in being an LMFT?
Well, I have to say it actually began long before I even went to graduate school. As a child, I was always drawn to feeling like I was a healer.
Okay.
Or that's what I felt my calling was.
Nice.
And as I grew up, just, interacting with friends or peers in school or things like that, I always just naturally fell into that role of listening to people and just wanting to help people. And then I went on to graduate school and became a licensed marriage and family therapist, and spent about the first 10 years of my practice working for different agencies at all different levels of care, everything from inpatient psychiatric settings to partial hospital settings, outpatient, group homes, residential facilities, community-based therapy.
So wow, we've done a lot.
Yes, and then so after about 10 years, I felt, okay, it's time for me to go into private practice. So then the last 10 years, I've been in private practice, and I have loved it ever since.
Yeah, I mean, with that variety that you've worked in, it's given you, and what I know you've talked about, large education base, so much experience. But there was a particular reason that, some folks who may be listening to might be wanting to go into private practice, but you wanted to go because, like we themed the show today, freedom in private practice, you were looking for that when you were with those agencies. Tell people more about what that experience was like.
Well, I saw very quickly that working for agencies, as a practitioner, you're very restricted with how you're able to practice. There are so many rules and regulations and just mounds of paperwork that need to be done.
I'm sure.
And it was very bureaucratic, and I just wasn't free to practice as I felt called to do.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to just see it as work. I see it as, this is my craft.
Nice.
This is, what I feel called to do.
Yes.
And I really was hungry for that freedom.
Yes, and one of the things that was so powerful about what you talked about is what we'll talk about too later in this segment is getting to a place where you could even provide Christian-based therapy. And that's so dynamic because you don't hear a lot of therapists who provide that as a way of, healing and restoring, as you noted. But tell folks a little bit just about the myriad of services that you provide in therapy.
So in therapy, I work with individuals, couples,
Right.
families. A lot of times people think when they hear a marriage and family therapist, they think it's just somebody who works with couples and families, but that's not the case. I work with even young children. I work
Awesome.
with individuals of all ages.
That's the family aspect of LMFT, right?
Right.
Yes, that's good.
I work with people of all backgrounds, all different faiths, and
you do life coaching.
I
I mean,
do
that's
life
so awesome. I
coaching.
mean, I wouldn't think of your practice and say she's a life coach, but you do that, right?
Yes.
And what other types of services you provide?
I also do hypnotherapy.
Uh-huh.
It's just another tool in my toolbox.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And, tell us a little bit more, because with therapy, sometimes folks may not understand, do I need it or not? What types of concerns do people come to you with?
Oh, people come to me with all kinds of concerns. It could be anything from anxiety, depression, PTSD,
Okay.
trauma, relationship issues,
Right.
Grief and loss. I mean, I could go on and on with so many different issues.
Yeah, but if someone, ultimately mental health, right? So you're addressing maybe something that's not as tangible as a doctor, right?
Yes.
But everything that has to do with the cognitive and the mental is kind of, everything is under the
Yes.
umbrella for you, correct?
Right,
Okay.
mental, emotional,
Awesome.
spiritual.
Yeah, and that's so awesome. And it maybe just help us understand, though, because maybe, I know sometimes, you have problems. I mean, everyone goes through emotions and so forth, and some days are bad or worse than others, right? And I'm sure everybody has thought of at one point, should I see someone, right? Regardless of whatever type of day it was. But, what is that mindset of people that do come to you? Like, how do they start with you? What's their mindset like?
Usually it'll start with somebody recognizing that they've got a problem or a challenge that feels like it's beyond their ability to work through by themselves.
Okay.
And they're seeking that professional help or guidance to be able to resolve whatever distress they're in.
Okay. And I know you had also described to me sometimes the way that you can kind of like really recognize if perhaps you need the therapy. Help people understand, because I do think with therapy there's a lot of stigmas, and sometimes people are even embarrassed,
Sure.
to say that they need help, especially with something maybe that they can't see, like if you get a cut or bruise, right? What are some ways that someone can almost have a watch out for themselves and say, you know what, maybe I need some professional help?
When it gets to the point where it's affecting your relationships,
Okay.
or where it's affecting your sleep, it's affecting your work life or your home life, when you have so much distress that you've lost your peace of mind.
Okay.
Things like that would be good indicators. But yes, you're right that often people will have a stigma associated with getting help for mental health issues, but the field of psychology and psychotherapy has come so far,
Okay.
just like the field of medicine.
Right.
And that stigma that still sometimes remains
Yes.
with mental health, it's really an antiquated way of thinking about
But so
mental
many people
health.
still think that way, though.
That's right. And I think it harkens back to a time, so long ago, a few hundred years ago, where if somebody had any mental health issues, they might actually get locked up in a sane asylum.
Oh, that's right.
and I think that stigma has not been broken off yet, but because of the advancement of research and science in the field of psychology, and not only that, but in neurology and the functioning of the brain and how that's tied in, there have been so many advances, and I kind of equate it to, for example, if somebody has a physical issue, they don't think twice about going to the doctors most of the time.
Okay.
You know, like if you have diabetes, or you fell and broke your wrist or something, you would just go, and you don't have this stigma attached to it, this extreme stigma like, oh, if you're going to the doctor, then that means you have leprosy or you've got the plague. But that's kind of analogous to how people see mental health. They go to that extreme of, well, then people are going to think I'm crazy.
Right.
But that's absolutely so far from the truth for the majority of people. It's just everyday people like you or I who are going through some issues that are not seen on the outside, but can sometimes be invisible on the inside, that they really can benefit from.
And I think that that's a great analogy and example to provide, because yes, you know, if we have diabetes, we think of nothing to take medicine, right? I mean, it's just, that's what you do, right? And you go to the pharmacy, and there's nothing private and closed about that. But yeah, it's just that encouragement, you know, of taking care of your mental health, maybe even recognizing it too, which I'm sure this is probably half of the problem of that awareness. I know one kind of practical way when we were talking about it that you mentioned to me before was, you know, a watch out for someone might be just as simple as, do you have like a stark reaction to something that probably is everyday to someone else? And that might be, is that fair?
Yes, absolutely. I see that quite a bit, particularly in cases where a person might have PTSD or a history of trauma, and they have a heightened startle reflex, or something that might not bother the average person. You know, this individual may have a really extreme reaction to that very same stimuli, if you will. And that is something that I really enjoy working with, is trauma. And there are some techniques that are very effective, that have been proven to be very effective with research. For example, a technique that I love to use, I'm trained to do, is called EMDR, which stands for Eye Movement Desensitization Reprocessing. It's a really long name, EMDR. And it's a technique that involves bilateral stimulation of the brain, which changes the way memories are stored. It's not hypnosis, but it has a way of discharging the emotion that's carried behind the trauma, and it works so quickly, which is one thing I really like about it.
Awesome. And we want to get a little bit more into some of the nuances with the types of services that you provide, because like we mentioned before, you have a dynamic toolbox, right? And so I want folks to really understand, you know, how to think about therapy, even some more stigmas around it, even in our African American community. So when we come back with Egypciel Victor-Lowderback, we're going to talk a little bit more about her practice, so you can really understand and get a feel for therapy and how it's very beneficial to you. We'll be right back with the Black Business Alliance show. Stay tuned.
What happens in the voting booth stays in the voting booth. Even if someone wheels you up to the polling station after buying your groceries or paying you by the hour to door knock, you still can vote like an independent thinker. Vote like you're demanding better police accountability. Vote like you're demanding functioning schools that put Hartford children first. Vote like you're demanding your mayor puts Hartford residents and neighborhoods first. Vote like Hartford's government belongs to you, the constituent. Because to the party, you are just a vote. However, to me, you are a constituent, my boss, and I work for you. So when you go into the voting booth, Have the courage to vote your conscience and vote for a man you can trust to be accountable to the constituents of Hartford. My name is J. Stan McCauley. I'm an independent thinker, and I approve this message. I'm asking you for your vote on Tuesday, November the 5th, 2019, in the general election for mayor of the city of Hartford. For more information, visit McCauleyformayor.com. And remember, what happens in the voting booth stays in the voting booth. Escape the plantation of party politics and free your political mind.
We are back with Egypciel Victor-Lowderback, LMFT, from Hartford, Connecticut, and she has a wonderful private practice that we're talking a little bit more about services, the therapy that she provides, counseling. And so she started getting into some very interesting methods and techniques that you use. And again, you know, we talk about freedom in private practice, and this was exactly the reason why you went into private practice, is because you now have a more dynamic and diverse toolbox that you can help. So you talked about the rapid eye movement. Did I say that correctly?
Yes. EMDR, eye
Okay.
movement desensitization
Okay.
processing, but yeah, it's a long name.
So apologize for the academics, but and then there was another one that you mentioned that you saw was very effective, and it was IFS. If maybe you could help folks understand
IFS, which stands for Internal Family Systems.
that. Okay.
And so the premise behind that is that just like we have an external family, we also have an internal family of our own parts.
Okay.
And it has to do with multiplicity of the mind. We all have many different parts of us that feel different things, believe different things, have different roles, have different ages, have different memories, and they're not always on the same page.
Okay.
And using that technique is very liberating for people who want to be able to restore their relationship with themselves.
Okay.
On a deeper level within themselves, within the different parts of them that are often working in opposition to each other.
Oh,
and
okay.
bringing back that harmony so that they're all on the same page and they're all able to get their needs met.
Interesting.
And I love it. I see how transformative it is, and
That's so
That's great.
awesome. I mean, now, one of the things that, you know, I think it started to be talked about a little bit more. We started talking about a little bit about the myths, right? Like, for instance, as simple as, hey, you just don't counsel couples, you counsel individuals. Another thing with, though, mental health is there's a bit of a struggle. I think you would agree in the African American community. And, you know, you just talked about some fantastic, you know, advances in medical science that complements your services and how well you can be effective with folks. But in our African American community, as you know, the addressing of mental health is still slow. Maybe if you could talk to that. Why do you think that's so, especially with African Americans?
I think there's a big issue with trust still. I think sometimes it's hard for people to really trust in, I guess, what some may consider, you know, the establishment or...
Okay.
Or,
That's fair, though.
You know, may not feel safe talking about their personal business with somebody they don't know. And sometimes, you know, you may hear somebody say, well, why do I need to pay to go see somebody? I can just talk to my friend. At times, you know, for simple things that may be okay, but there are times when you really do need a person with training, you know, who knows how to diagnose, who knows how to
That's right.
refer you for medication, for example, if that were needed, or who has an idea of different lenses through which the issue needs to be seen and worked with, and that's so important.
But what I like most therapists like you, one of the things that I know you stressed with in terms of that trust factor that is one of the underlying currents in the African American community, is that they're coming into a relationship with a professional that is confidential. And it's the biggest, probably one of the biggest nuggets that needs to make sure you almost have to reiterate
Absolutely.
for that trust to even build, right?
Yes, that's very, very crucial. It's something that I inform, new clients of, right at the beginning, that everything in our session is confidential by law through HIPAA laws. However, no matter what practitioner you go to, whether it's mental health or physical health, we are at the same time mandated reporters.
That's right.
So I always let people know that up front. And for those who may not know what that means, being a mandated reporter is that people in certain professions, including therapists, doctors, teachers even, and many more, by law, have to report, for example, child abuse or neglect cases. And that's really to protect children.
Of course.
Or if, let's say, my records were subpoenaed by a court.
Okay.
But in my whole 20 years of practicing, 20 plus years, I've only had that happen once.
Oh, wow. Okay.
However, one thing I do want to mention is that because I'm in private practice, I have the freedom of how I choose to write my notes.
Okay.
So I take the protection of my clients' privacy very seriously. That is so super important to me. It's like up here.
Yes.
And because of that, the notes I take are vague. I know what I mean, but I protect my clients'
That's
privacy
awesome.
even in my notes, which nobody ever sees.
Okay.
But should they ever,
You've already taken precautionary measures.
I've already taken precautions.
That's so awesome.
I don't put, really personally identifying information or get into the details of people's issues in my notes. I leave that out.
That's so awesome. And when you talk about the freedom in your practice, I think one of the things that stuck out to me the most is the faith-based element to your practice. And again, it was like one of the other affirmations that you were so happy about when you talked about the fact that many people are seeking a Christian foundation in their therapy. And many times when you do counsel individuals, it's because, as you mentioned before, they lost their connection to God. Talk a little bit about that Christian-based portion of your practice.
Honestly, that's one of my most favorite aspects of my practice because I have that freedom. I have so many people who come to me because they're searching for a therapist who has a foundation in Christianity, because the way they want to address the issues they're seeking help with is they want to use their faith as part of their solution.
That's right.
And they want somebody who can work with them and be on the same page as them, and to have that background, have that foundation as part of what informs the work.
Right.
And that's so important to me. And I feel like there's a real shortage of Christian-based therapists out there, and people are really seeking that.
Yeah, and that goes back to what you talk about, your sense of purpose since you were a little kid, restoring and healing, and when you do things in a Christian path, that's ultimately that restoration of making someone whole, right?
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many people who, because of their histories of trauma or woundedness, that they've, perhaps fallen away from their relationship with God, or they have that barrier, and deep down they want that restoration. They want to be delivered from
That's right.
so much that they feel they're being held in bondage to, that they want healing from, so that they can have that restoration with their relationship, the relationships not only horizontally with people in their lives, but also vertically with their relationship with God.
That's so awesome.
And I see there's such a connection between the physical, emotional, and spiritual components. They're all tied together.
That's right. And when we talk about, the relationships we do have in all aspects of our communities and all the communities we belong in, it's so important to create and build kingdom everywhere you are.
Yes.
So, the workplace and home and, out at church, regardless. I know you've talked about that rising, increasing need that you're finding with folks, especially individuals, right, who are seeking that healing.
Yes.
That's so awesome. When we come back with Egypciel Victor-Lowderback, we're going to talk a little bit more about her practice. She has some interesting pearls of wisdom that she wants to share with some of you who may be even thinking about going into private practice. So stay tuned, stay with us while we continue talking to Egypciel Victor-Lowderback, LMFT. We'll be right back.
Independent thinkers are Puerto Rican, Mexican, Peruvian, Indian, Bosnian, Italian, Irish, Jamaican, African American, European, straight, gay, Nigerian, transgender, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, short, tall, skinny, rich, poor, happy, sad. Some of us hold a PhD and others a GED. And though we may be Democrats, Republicans, or members of the Working Families Party, we all have escaped the plantation of party politics and become independent thinkers because we as individuals are more than a party. You see, independent thinkers come from all walks of life, and the one thing we all have in common is that we love, live, laugh, and learn in the city of Hartford. We are the constituents, and the government of Hartford belongs to us. My name is J. Stan McCauley. I'm an independent thinker, and I approve this message because it's time to stop towing the party line and vote for a candidate you can trust. I'm asking you for your vote November the 5th, 2019 in the general election for mayor of the city of Hartford. For more information, visit McCauleyformayor.com. You too can escape the plantation of party politics if you have the courage to free your political mind.
Welcome back. Guilaine Menefee with the Black Business Alliance show. For today's theme, freedom in private practice, we have in the studio Egypciel Victor-Lowderback, Hartford-based LMFT. And we were talking about just the dynamic breadth of services that she provides from a therapy perspective. Now, when we talk about therapy, we talk about mental health and we talk about the connection with medical science. And I think it would be great just to clarify for some of our viewers who may be wondering, because there are some do's and don'ts with you, right? Outside of what we talked about in length, the confidentiality. But you also talked about, your view on medicine and how you really engage with clients around the therapy you provide, and that as a tool, but not your first choice.
Right. My perspective on medication is that I prefer for that to be the absolute last resort, because medication isn't the answer to everything.
Right.
And often I feel like it's prescribed too much at times, or at times when it's not necessary.
Okay.
I'll give you an example. For example, sometimes I'll see people who think they're depressed and they're being medicated, taking antidepressants, having all these side effects, when what they're experiencing is not depression at all. It can be grief and loss.
Okay.
For example, that's an example. Or, and then I can help them work through that. Or sometimes somebody may be struggling with anxiety, and with the use and learning of coping skills, they can manage their anxiety, or even be freed from it once they really work through the issues that were at the root of it, without the need for an anti-anxiety medication. And so I really prefer to try to exhaust all methods first before resorting to that, which is very different, I feel, than when I was in private practice, it just felt like, I'm sorry, when I was working for an agency,
Yeah.
it felt like they wanted to have you prescribe, refer
Probably more
them to the
assembly line-ish.
psychiatrist.
Yeah.
It just felt much more assembly line like.
Yeah. And I mean, that makes sense to me. I just think of when I'm at home watching TV and, at least 2 commercials within the program I'm watching is about some medicine. And, they overprescribe, as you mentioned, but they over message us. If that's
Right.
really a word, but they do. The messaging is just, it keeps on repeating on medication. And I think you're right. I mean, we have a crisis right now, national crisis, opioid crisis. But outside of that, you're right. I think we default to
Yes.
pills a little bit too much.
Too much.
Yeah, so that's great to know. You only, again, but if you do prescribe medicine, it's always last resort. But you can, right?
Actually, I don't prescribe.
Oh, okay, good.
So that would be something I can clarify. The difference between I'm a psychotherapist versus a psychiatrist.
Ah, okay.
A psychiatrist is an MD.
Okay.
And they receive additional training in the field of psychiatry, in addition to their basic medical school
Okay.
training. So psychiatrists tend to focus primarily, I'd say these days, on writing the prescriptions.
Oh, okay, sure.
Doing the meds. They generally these days don't even do therapy anymore. Whereas
Wow.
for me, I do the actual therapy, the
Yes.
transformative work.
That's right. Okay. That's good. That's good for folks to understand that difference. Thank
Yeah.
you for that clarification. Now, you're in private practice, right? And so there's probably folks out here who are coming from a similar background, right? Most of us come from either a corporate America or working with an agency. What would you say to entrepreneurs that are watching you today and they're like, I was thinking about private practice. What would you give them as advice?
Well, I would start with really take a look at the lifestyle you're wanting for yourself.
Okay.
If you're wanting, the predictability of your schedule being exactly the same, for the most part, and your salary being exactly the same, then you may want to stay working for an agency or whatever.
Yeah, organization.
But if you're wanting freedom of your time, if you're wanting the freedom to practice the way you feel called to do, and to really be able to hone your craft and to really provide that depth of and quality, I should say, of service to your clients, you may want to consider private practice. Also, if you want freedom from all of the bureaucracy and the mounds of paperwork that doesn't help you, the therapist, or the client, you may want to consider going into private practice, because
That's good to know.
I don't deal with all of that stuff anymore that I used to. All of the oppressive paperwork and regulations and state mandates, all of that stuff I don't deal with anymore. I actually have the freedom to spend the time that I want with my clients.
Awesome.
I'm not bound to a quota of billable sessions I have to meet for the agency. So I'm trying to cram as many people as I can in
There's
the
no
limited amount of time.
there's no quality in your
to
service.
that.
That's
no.
right.
Whereas for me, I tend to do, for the most part, an hour-long session. Whereas in agency work, it's usually just 45 minutes.
Okay.
And often, I'll even go longer with my clients. Why? Because I can.
Yeah.
And I want to.
That's right.
And
Well, you're a
because-
boss, right?
That's
and
right,
You're,
that's right.
You're
And-
your own CEO, and you run your practice the way you want and
That's
see
right.
fit. That's
And,
so awesome.
I make my schedule
Yep.
the way I want it. I can take time off and vacations whenever I want. I love it.
Yeah,
So
and-
that's one consideration.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, what you described, it's agnostic. It's not just private practice, it's being an entrepreneur, right?
Yes.
And I think that many times that's where folks come into this journey, is because they want that freedom with how they do their craft, the way that they deliver their services to the customers. And it gives you that, unique perspective that's different than folks that are run by an organization. Any regrets though you would have in going to private practice? I mean, as you know, as an entrepreneur, everything is not peachy keen, and you have your ups and downs. But what would you say to somebody? Do you have any regrets with going into private practice?
Honestly, the only regret I would say that I have is not having done it sooner.
Oh, okay.
I'll be honest, that's my only regret. However, I did learn a lot from that first 10 years of working for different agencies at different levels of care and just seeing how the system works.
Yes.
So I do see the value in that. However, I am so glad that I got out of that.
Okay.
And so yeah, that would be my only regret.
Okay. Well, I'm sure folks are very interested in connecting with you because you do have such a dynamic breadth of services, and you really put the quality of your time with your customers first. So I would love for people to really understand how to connect with you. So if you could just tell our viewers, how can they find you? How can they call you? How can they find you online?
Sure. My phone number would probably be the easiest if any viewers would like to get pen or paper. It's 860-965-1111. My website, my URL, unfortunately, it's really long, but it's basically just my whole name.com. And I'm sure it's on the screen, so I don't have to spell it all out. But or email. You can email me at Egypciel.com. I'm sorry, Egypciel@gmail.com. Excuse me. And my first name is spelled E-G-Y, P as in Peter, C as in cat, I-E-L @gmail.com. And you can get in touch with me.
Or you can contact the Black Business Alliance. This is why we have such a awesome and strong network that we engage with entrepreneurs like her who provide such a quality of service in license in marriage and family therapy, and we are so grateful that you're able to share with us everything that you do. And she's right here in Hartford, so please take down her information. You actually have a very nice mobile. I wish I had that. 1111. That's like, you can't forget that. 860-965-1111. I already memorized it. But we really appreciate you being here with us. Again, if you want to connect with dynamic entrepreneurs that are right here in our backyard, go to our URL at bebusinessalliance.org, and we will connect you with some of these dynamic gems, as we call them, because they're right here in Connecticut and you need to know about them. My name is Guilaine Menefee, your producer and host, and we thank you for joining us today. Come back next Tuesday about the same time, around your lunchtime, and share a half hour with us to get to know some of these dynamic entrepreneurs right here in the state of Connecticut. Stay tuned and come back. See you next week.